My Little Dog Story by Giedrė Kumpikas. I had a little dog. His name was Cachito. That is short for cacho, which in Argentinian Spanish means little dear one. He was a Chihuahua, chocolate-colored, and the man at the pet shop had given him the name Chocolate, pronounced in the Spanish fashion. But I thought the name was not elegant enough for him because he was beautiful, sleek and a golden chocolate color. I didn't love him very much in the beginning because I wanted a doggy exactly like the one I had just lost. But I realized soon that no two are the same and that I was going to develop a very different relationship with this one. He was adorable and had from the very beginning a warrior personality. He would run across the room with the intensity and determination of a little rhinoceros when he heard the sound at the door. He defended his territory with all his little might. Not an inch would he give. And he had no complex about size. He was the fastest little doggy I had ever seen. He raced across the yard like a brown flash and back again, and once he even caught a squirrel. The early years were stormy. After he reached his first birthday, December 11th, he was a Sagittarius, he began not to like being touched. No more caressing his ears or his nose or back. His attitude was, I am a very self-sufficient, independent personality. So I did not touch him, but contented myself with sometimes brushing my hand lightly across his silky back. Then he would turn abruptly and growl. I overcame my rejection and accommodated myself to his personality, and so we lived. He would trot after me and I would give him his food. As every good little watchdoggy, he would accompany me to the door and then greet me when I came home. During the day, I would hear his tags jingling after me or the patter of his little paws. His nails were always long because to cut them, impossible. It would have been a major battle and enormous stress for both. So I left them alone and he managed to do his pedicure himself. He was always clean, so there was no bath on his schedule. I also soon learned that little dogs have very definite food preferences. This one was curiously inclined to be a vegetarian. He loved soups, lentil, cabbage, beet, and pea soup, sometimes broccoli, but no barley and absolutely no spinach. Spaghetti, not a chance. Chinese food, absolutely not. Anything with sauces he rejected. Chicken and rice were his staple diet, but in between it was soup and sometimes potatoes, especially potato skins. Where he got these proletariat tastes was a mystery to me. No brie or any other cheese. Oh yes, he also liked a little warm milk. And I forgot to mention, I taught him a very bad habit, to have a spoonful of coffee with me in the morning. After all, he was a Mexican doggy from a tropical land. The mailman, every dog's mortal enemy. Waiting for the mail was no ordinary event. It began at about noon. The first stage was to jump up on the bay window and lie in wait. When the mailman barely came into view across the street, the squealing would begin. Then jumping up on his hind legs, he'd begin to paw the window pane and squeal even louder. While there was still a curtain on the window, Cachito's entire little body would be under the curtain, except for the tail, and as he jumped, the tail would rise with it the curtain. And finally, when he felt that the mailman was close, he'd jump off the window seat, run to the door, and jump as high as he could to reach the mail slot in the door. When the mail began to appear through the slot, he would rip it out of the mailman's hand and begin to tear it to shreds. Papers flying, checks in the air. With rage, he'd grab an envelope with a window between his teeth. He preferred these because they made a crackling sound, and would shake his head back and forth, all the while emitting the most ferocious growls. After a few minutes, there was nothing but a pile of mangled mail on the floor and many a check with little teeth marks. It was the most exciting and anticipated part of the day. After his daily ritual had been performed, he would trot off somewhere, quite often with shreds of paper still hanging to his little jaws. Why didn't I stop him? Absolutely not. It was too amusing to watch it. And besides, he had so few pleasures. Although, if I spotted a very important letter about to be destroyed, I would lure it away from him with a noisy envelope, and it would be saved. To Cachito, everything was junk mail. Dramatic scene. Cachito with Jabot. One morning, while I was still in my nightrobe, pale mauve silk, he rubbed against me and his tag clip got caught on the hem of the robe. He panicked and started to pull. I panicked and began to pull as well to try to unhook it. No success. He panicked even more and pulled harder. So I took off my robe and watched it going down the hall into the spare bedroom. But before he had dragged it in completely into the room and under the safe haven of the bed, I grabbed the end and closed the door while still holding the end through a gnawed-out space he had made. Now I must explain about the gnawed-out space. Cachito did not like having doors closed on him, so he would fight this every time and attack the side of the door. Through the years, almost all the doors had little teeth marks, but this one had about an inch-wide space because his attacks had been fierce and frequent. Taking advantage of this fortunate gap, I held on to the robe and pulled and pulled. Finally, I had most of the robe out with Cachito close to the door on the other side, and I began to hear choking sounds. So I cut the end of the rope and released my stranglehold on my fighter doggy. A few minutes later, he came out of the room in a great formal dress, a pink silk jabot under his chin. It was really pretty. He was pretty. The decoration in silk was charming. Lunchtime came. No way to detach the jabot, so in it went into the food dish. After some days, the jabot was no longer pink, but still firmly attached. A real dilemma, how to get it off before it became an unsightly rag. Well, the heavens finally took pity on a bewildered owner and a discontented pet, and one day, while rolling around on the bed and scratching at it, the jabot came off by itself. It was a treasure, an unforgettable trophy of a battle of strength and wit, which, after being washed, was carefully sewn back on the robe, slightly less pink and slightly discolored, but still maintaining its perfect bow-like shape. Cachito and the tarpaulin leggings. I believe I mentioned my doggie was a fighter. No, more precisely a warrior. My mother was not well, and I was employing a woman to assist her. She was a very patient and kind woman, and got along reasonably well with Cachito because she had been instructed carefully as to what to do, or rather, more precisely, what not to do. It was forbidden to cross the hallway in front of the large front closet because that was his hideout. I must mention parenthetically that all Chihuahuas hide. They are very small dogs and constantly on the lookout for danger. Other dogs, ill-tempered owners, abusive children. So he used to hide out frequently in the front closet, sometimes barricading himself there with a pillow. Do not enter. Do not pass in front. If someone forgot and passed this dangerous intersection, he would lunge out of the closet and either an ankle or a calf or any other available part of the unfortunate passerby would be nipped. So she learned the routine. Do not pick up anything from the floor. Do not pet him, do not stand nearby when he is eating, and do not pass in front of the closet. Their relationship was not an easy one, but livable. However, after too many little bite marks on her unlucky legs, she decided to make herself some leggings from very strong tarpaulin. Guaranteed to resist almost any puncture. Excellent precaution. The construction seemed foolproof, but not to my clever little high jumper. How he understood that the leggings were a protection against him, I do not know. But one day he measured the distance to the top of the legging, and with one precise leap, he reached the unfortunate lady's leg just above the covered part and nipped. Another protection of my mother's invention was wearing winter boots at all times. This was indeed an effective protection, but rather uncomfortable in the summer. But both ladies clunked around with them because the alternative was little teeth. Now you will be curious as to why I would keep such a wild doggie. Difficult to explain. First of all, he wasn't always on the attack. It was actually nice and very, very amusing. But you had to be careful, always, watch where you stepped, and not infringe on his territory. And his territory was the entire house. I would avoid crossing any dangerous lines, but sometimes when I passed too closely to him, he would raise a suspicious eye, but seeing no imminent danger would relax. So it was a constant guessing game. Who will get there first? If he got there first, he would growl and I would back off. If I got there first, he would look at me with displeasure and walk away. Cachito and the orangerie. Plants accumulated in my house. I did not particularly like them, but I could not throw them out or put them outside in the winter to die, so they grew and flourished. I was not inclined towards gardening, inside or out. I just watered them once a day, sometimes too much, but never too little, and they all seemed content. The two plants I really loved were a beautiful large gardenia, which went outside onto the patio in the summer and was hauled back inside in the winter. The other one was amaryllis, which blossomed once a year in the summer, ostensibly for my birthday. The others were, if not gifts, then homeless, humble little plants. They were placed on assorted small tables in no particular order, some on higher ground, others on the floor. It was a mini jungle to be enjoyed by a very small dog who wandered around this lush territory, sniffing here, sniffing there. When he was still a puppy, he would sometimes eat the soil from the plants, leading me to believe that he needed some of the minerals, and for this reason my plants never received any fertilizer. One day, a huge house guest, and I say huge because in comparison to my dog he was just that, decided to put some order into the placement of the plants, and before I could say watch out, in went his hand among the foliage and was pulled out sharply with a sound akin to ouch, and I saw a bloody thumb. Cachito came out from behind a potted plant, growling as if to say, "That's what you get for sticking your big thumb in my face." Cachito and the food bowl. I mentioned before that you had to be careful in giving him his food. When Cachito was hungry, he would begin circling around my legs, licking his little mouth. Sometimes he would raise himself on his two hind legs and scratch at me, clear signs that I had to feed him. The ritual was again rather complicated. Whatever the day's fare was, whether soup or chicken and rice, it was placed into his bowl, but then the psychology began. The bowl had to be placed on the floor quickly, and the placer had to withdraw just as quickly because in Cachito's mind, the food that was being so generously given could just as easily be taken away. So as soon as the bowl was on the floor, he would turn, not in gratitude, but with an angry growl for you to back off. And if this was not done quickly enough to suit him, he would attack. One would think that the doggy would now happily enjoy his meal. Not exactly. The second part of this procedure was the requirement that the human being who had given him the food sit quietly on a chair at a safe distance and watch over him while he ate. Even so, he would periodically turn his head suspiciously and look if there were any threat or imminent danger. And there could be no loud talking while His Little Majesty ate. If anyone talked too loudly or made an unwanted noise, the eating would stop and he would bark, or even worse. Cachito and sleeping. Many little dogs sleep with their owners. Actually, many large dogs sleep with their owners as well. Sleeping, like everything else with this complicated little dog, was an adventure. When he was still a puppy, I let him sleep on my bed. However, after some time, I became sleepless and began to look haggard. The reason was this: he would fall asleep, then I would want to turn over. But no, I could not because of a solid little weight at my feet or against my leg. If I moved, there would be a sudden growl and the usual bite. This was not the best way to spend the night, constantly thinking and planning every move of your body. This could be done only very gingerly and carefully, sometimes one leg or foot or even toe at a time. And even then it was risky. I solved this problem by putting a basket on the floor with a folded soft comforter in it. Fortunately, this was to his liking, but the nights were still not quite peaceful. Even then, when I turned over, or if by some mischance a part of my comforter slid down the side of the bed, on him, there was a royal reaction. Later, as he became older, he could no longer jump on the bed because it became too high. One would think that now there would be peace. Not so. I could reasonably well go to bed and settle in, but if there were any reason to get up, then getting back to bed was a challenge. I never could understand why this stage bothered him. This is what used to happen. After I had gotten up and, let's say, gone to the bathroom, I would then peer out from behind the door to see where he was. If he was in his basket, then I had to simulate that I was going out of the bedroom and into the kitchen or down the hall, and then worry about getting back in somehow. If he was not in his basket, that meant he was under the bed, lying in wait for a toe or a foot to be reachable. I would then time my movements quickly, 2 or 3 large steps to reach the bed, and then leap onto it as a fierce growling noise was heard from below. Then I could breathe a sigh of relief. One night's challenge overcome. Cachito and the Traveling Comforter. As I mentioned, he liked the soft comforter. It was old and not stiff and easily movable. And move it did. Sometimes as I sat in the kitchen, I would see it traveling down the hall. Sometimes I would find it stretched out in the living room, in all its old fineness. It was an inexpensive comforter, easily transportable for a very small but strong doggy. The comforter did not present a moving challenge, but a big, heavy bolster seemed impregnable, a rock of Gibraltar. It was one of those big brown bolsters with armrests that people used to sit in their beds and read at night. It was heavy, it was cumbersome, and not at all an appealing object for a small dog. But my life with Cachito was full of surprises, and one day I heard a huffing, puffing, straining, and growling, and I looked into the hallway to see what was happening. And there was Cachito, struggling with the unwieldy bolster, and he was winning. The bolster was traveling down the hall in the same direction as the comforter. Cachito was an incredibly strong doggy from champion stock, a fighter to the end. Cachito and the Soprano. One evening there was a rehearsal at my home. A tenor, a soprano, and a pianist were going to rehearse in the den for a performance at the Javits Center. The tenor and the pianist were both familiar with Cachito's idiosyncrasies and personality, but the soprano was not. I suppose most sopranos are divas and many are blondes. This one was blonde and temperamental. The evening of this rehearsal, the door to the den or music room had been closed for privacy, and in my opinion to protect the performers from any foreign onslaught. And then we heard the sounds, and what sounds? The tenor with all his power, the soprano reaching for a high note. Adding the pounding of the piano was too much for Cachito. His little ears had never experienced such piercing noises, and he reacted. He barked. The soprano sang. He barked louder. The soprano sang louder. Then Cachito, not being able to stand the noise anymore, pushed and barged his way in through the door and attacked the soprano's leg. She screamed, "He just bit me," but kept on singing. Only her notes became higher. Before a major war erupted, I managed to get him out of the rehearsal. One could always count on Cachito to make an appearance and an impression. Cachito and the Blonde Indian. Cachito did not like women visitors, but he also did not like all men visitors either. If anyone wants, in reading these reminiscences, to get a Chihuahua as a pet, he or she must know that Chihuahuas are not other dogs, but rather people dogs, and with that, very particular about people as well. In all the years that I had this quite individual and unusual doggy, I only saw him fall in love once, and that was with Frank. Frank was a young man, very handsome, blonde, and of Native American heritage, Cherokee, I believe. He was friendly, generous, and helpful, a very kind young man. Frank lived for a while downstairs, and when Cachito used to hear him moving about, he would immediately position himself at the top of the basement stairs. He was afraid to go downstairs, and his whole little body would tremble in anticipation. His tail would wag. He would step from little foot to little foot, and when Frank began to climb the stairs, Cachito's excitement knew no bounds. Frank could pet him, stroke his back, pull his tail, even tweak his nose. No reaction except a greater wagging of the tail and pure joy. This went on for months, and then Frank met a bad woman and moved out. Cachito would go every day at a certain hour to the top of the stairs and wait, and when Frank did not appear, he would walk off dejectedly. It was a sad sight and yet so moving to see a little dog who loved another human being so much. Native Americans have a special understanding of animals, of that I am certain. After a while, he stopped going to the landing, but I am also certain that Cachito never forgot Frank. Frank never came back. Sometime later, he committed suicide. Cachito and another pianist, or Lady Godiva. Musician visitors were quite frequent in my home. For many years, a very talented young violinist lived with me, and then he invited a young pianist to come and accompany him for a recital. She was a stately, lovely, and lively young woman with cascades of long blonde hair. I gave her the famous rehearsal den in which to sleep. There was a long couch fairly low to the ground, and she seemed quite comfortable sleeping on it. Being a true artist, all her things were scattered all over the floor, and one had to step gingerly to avoid crushing any tubes of creams or any of the other small and sundry objects that young women pack when traveling. This room now became a realm of adventure, unfamiliar smells, unfamiliar things, and all within Cachito's reach, and explore he did. One morning I heard a strange sound, a mixture of ah and ouch. The door to the den had been pushed open by my inveterate explorer, and he was on his hind legs with his front paws entangled in a mass of long, flowing blonde hair, which was hanging down the side of the couch. She had been sleeping on her stomach, and her hair had been cascading down to the floor. Cachito had never seen such a golden phenomenon, and it had been quite too much to resist, so he plunged into it. It took a while to disentangle them, but once again he had discovered the beauty of the unknown. Cachito and the unlucky tenor. This was the same tenor who had experienced the attack on the temperamental soprano. He was staying downstairs in the basement and had settled in comfortably. There were closets, but invariably full of old, unwanted clothing, sad reminders of days gone by, but yet not quite ready to bid their final farewell to a home they had known. So the tenor, being a good sport, hung his clothing, which was a brand new suit, on a clothesline directly under the upstairs hallway. Sometime before this new musical visitor graced my now famous artistic basement, I had removed the wall-to-wall carpeting in the hallway. In so doing, there appeared a small space between the last wooden floorboard and the molding. As I may have mentioned sometime before, my doggy made his own rules and had been difficult to train, and at times downright disobedient. One evening, I suddenly heard the tenor running up the stairs exclaiming that there was water dripping from my floor and that there must be a leak. I immediately suspected what had happened, but tried not to react, halfway hoping that it was not true. Cachito had just innocently exited the hallway. What the little rascal had done was to let a stream of his own making down through the crack by the wall and right onto the shoulder of the tenor's new suit. What to do? "Oh, that little devil," wailed the tenor. "I have a recital tomorrow." Fortunately, the dry cleaner was nearby and managed to repair the damage, and if one did not have a very good nose, one might hopefully not notice. Cachito and the piano. When he was still a puppy, and you could lift him up in the palm of your hand, a violinist friend of my violinist nephew came to visit and see the new doggy. As I said, this doggy was not lacking in personality, and immediately began flirting with the two young musicians. Suddenly, the friend scooped Cachito up and set him down on the piano keys. And there was the little musician, stepping lightly with his little paws over the chords. Then another, each time surprised at the sounds he was producing and delighting the mischievous young violinist. I suggested they compose a Cachito concerto, but they did not, although they should have, since the melodious sounds produced by Cachito were far more pleasant than some of the strident, atonal music written these days, music not fit for the ears of man or God. Cachito guarding the bathroom door. To be a guest in my home was full of perils. As one entered my house, one came into a small foyer containing the famous front closet. Then, to the right was a large, long living room where I normally received my guests. If, however, one went to the left, one would come to a hallway where, contiguous to the front door, there was a guest bathroom. Most guests were greeted at the door with the usual canine effusion, after which they were allowed to sit and socialize, while Cachito remained on watch for any untoward movements, loud noises, or anything unfamiliar and threatening. Frequently, he would go into the front closet and guard from there. The difficulty arose when a guest wanted to use the aforementioned bathroom. Cachito would immediately position himself in front of the door and with a ferocious growl guard the entrance. If the guests were familiar with this little Cerberus, he would dash into the bathroom and would quickly close the door and worry about exiting later. Rarely was the exit not stormy. No sooner did the bathroom door open than Cachito would lunge at the poor intruder with all the power of his little body, and I almost always had to intervene and lure him away with his security pillow. This, of course, would be repeated with almost every guest. After some time, my doggie became famous, or perhaps I should say infamous, and less courageous visitors became infrequent. I must, however, mention that not all guests were deterred by this guard dog approach. Some used clever doggy psychology and succeeded in getting around his military tactics by simply standing still and then moving ever so slightly out of the bathroom with reassuring phrases of "good boy, good boy." Loves and hates of a little dog. I mentioned before that Cachito loved Frank, but he also hated. There is something in the chemistry of a dog, or perhaps of any animal, that instinctively draws them to one human and repels them from another. Cachito hated my cousin Al, and even more so his girlfriend. No sooner would Al come through the door than the barking would start and would not stop until I put my little dog in his room. There he would bark until he became tired, but as soon as he heard Al moving about, or heard a louder exclamation of some sort, the barking would begin again. That was because Al was not a very nice man, and not an animal lover to boot. Now his girlfriend, for some reason, inspired the greatest animosity I had ever seen in my little one. She came in, he barked. She sat down, he barked. She sat at the dinner table, he got under the table and barked. She moved her foot, he growled and attacked her shoe. She was also not a very nice woman. How Cachito knew the character of these two people will always be a mystery to me. But he also loved instantly. I have a rather rotund, portly friend named Ron, who was a dog lover and had a German Shepherd. One day he came to visit. He entered. The doggie looked at him, did not utter a sound, sniffed his shoes, and as Ron sat down, up jumped Cachito on his round, soft lap and settled in comfortably. Ron was not the only one that Cachito liked. There was also Dave and Michael and some others with whom he felt an instant bond. Since I am not a dog psychiatrist, I cannot analyze his likes and dislikes, but I have become certain that dogs understand people much more quickly than we do, and all this without expensive psychological training. Their little inner barometers measure precisely the moods and emotions of humans as they read inner thoughts. Oh, Cachito, you were such a clever little mind reader. Cachito and the birthday cake. It was summer and my birthday. I invited my niece and a friend to have some champagne and cake to celebrate. We placed the champagne and the cake on a round glass-top coffee table in the living room. The tabletop was only attached to the base by a large brass knob in the middle and would turn, if one wished, almost like a lazy Susan. At first, Cachito was confused. He would stand under the glass portion of the table and would try to reach whatever he could see on top. This, however, proved to be fruitless and frustrating. But being a clever doggy, he soon realized that if he stood up on his hind legs and put his little front paws on the edge of the glass top, he could indeed reach certain goodies, or at least sniff them. And so on that birthday afternoon, he was circling around under the table waiting. He knew that food on this table meant a special event. The champagne glasses were placed, the cake was aglow with lit candles, and suddenly my doggie hopped on his hind legs, saw the flames, sniffed the air, and in so doing sneezed and blew out 5 birthday candles. Laughter, delight. He might have been the only doggy ever to make a birthday wish. Rustling leaves. Red, gold, burnt orange, yellow, all the blazing colors of fall. And in the middle, under a very old majestic oak tree, in a carpet of rustling, crackling foliage, a small brown head would appear, then disappear. Then with a leap, like a small doe, appear again, only to disappear once again in the shimmering hues of fallen leaves. Cachito had discovered fall, and what a discovery! He did not know if he should run through this carpet of colors, hide in it, bound up and down, a joyful discovery as only a little dog in the delight of youth could feel. Flying leaves cascading around a racing flash of chocolate brown, back and forth and back and forth. Ah, Cachito, your exuberance was contagious, and I cannot look at falling leaves without sadness. First snow. At the ripe age of 1, Cachito experienced his first snowfall. He stepped to the sill of the back door and looked, then sniffed the air, unfamiliarly cold. What to make of it? There was a small snowdrift by the door, not very deep, just even with the sill. He gingerly stepped forth, and down he went. Fright, confusion. What could this new matter be? But being of a brave and curious nature, he got up, shook himself, and found the snow not unpleasant, but where were the steps down to the yard? Everything seemed even and white. As curious as he was almost a very cautious little dog. Whatever was unfamiliar was judiciously avoided, so he stood on the patio as snowflake after snowflake fell on his nose and melted. He licked some of them, blinked to clear his eyelids, and as his coat became covered with a lovely white glow, he finally decided that warmth was better than cold, and leaving a small circle of trampled snow with tiny footprints, hopped up and sought his favorite sunny spot in the living room carpet. A touch of autumn gray. And then the inevitable happened. Cachito began to age. Little by little, and very slowly at first, because after all he was a small dog, and small dogs are supposed to live longer, but little by little I began to notice some gray on his small nose, then above his eyebrows, a bit around his ears, and finally his deep, rich chocolate color began to become lighter and interspersed with gray. He did not chase the squirrels as much, nor did he take flying leaps off the patio to chase them. As the years went on, the squirrels no longer ran when they saw him, and he pretended not to see them because in his little heart he probably knew he would not catch them, and it was safer to ignore them haughtily. He used to wait for me on the bay window, which furnished a wide perspective of the street. I noticed that he began to have difficulty jumping up onto the window seat, so I placed a large poof on the floor to facilitate his ascent. He got used to that, and for some years they suited him. Then one day he looked at the poof, measured the height, and slowly walked away. It was heartbreaking. I took some cushions from other couches and created a pyramid type of ascent of graduated steps, but this construction seemed precarious to him and was rejected. On some days he would still, however, climb up on the poof and, standing on his hind legs, peer through the window and bark at a lonely passerby. He began to sleep more and no longer wanted to fetch the ball thrown him with the invitation of, "Cachito, let's play." Then he would look dejectedly at me and walk away. However, there were sunny days still. The process was so gradual that we both grew into it. I accepted the new, calmer little dog, and he was grateful while still maintaining his supreme independence. Nonetheless, I felt his insecurity growing with the years. He would sit closer by me, even lean against my leg, which he never used to do before. His eyesight began to fail. He began to bump into door frames, into furniture legs. One day, I had let him out into the yard, and he wanted to go in before I did. No sooner had I let him in than I heard a large noise and then a cry. Cachito had gone into the kitchen, and as he walked to the hall to go to the bedroom, he stepped through the basement door and fell 12 steps straight down. As I ran down in a panic, fearing that he had broken a leg or even worse, I saw the ever-valiant Cachito standing at the foot of the stairs, dazed and wondering where he was and what had happened to him. I scooped him up with his pillow and carefully carried him back up the stairs, his little body trembling, his heart pounding. The whole day I watched him carefully to see if he did not show any signs of internal bleeding or other damage. But although dazed and shaken, he survived that experience without a trip to the doctor. Attack. About 6 months before Cachito fell down the stairs into the basement, on a sunny June day, he was outside in the yard patrolling his territory when a very big and violent neighbor's dog jumped the fence into our yard and attacked Cachito. I screamed as I saw the huge jaws of this mastiff-like canine go around my little dog's head. I ran down the steps as the neighbor jumped over the fence to control his dog. I thought for certain that Cachito had been killed, but no sooner had the dog released his grip that Cachito got up, jumped up the 2 steps onto the patio, and ran inside. He ran into the darkest part of the closet and sat there shaking for a long time. I saw some blood on his leg, but it did not look like an open wound, so I decided that subjecting him to more stress by taking him to the vet was not wise. Cachito recovered, but after this incident, he became very fearful of the yard. Finally, he stopped going out altogether. Although it was summer for Cachito, deep autumn was in the air. He began to cough. He lost his appetite. Even lentil soup did not tempt him. A visit to the doctor, enlarged heart, Lasix. He improved dramatically. He regained his appetite, and the mail began to fly again. But then, one day in late July, as we both sat in the living room, he at my feet, he heard the mailman at the door. All the old instincts revived, and he dashed for the door to grab the mail. Too much for his little heart. I heard an unusual and unfamiliar sound. I cried, "Cachito!" He was lying on his side, then got up, took a few steps into the front closet, found no solace there, then staggered into the study, lay down, took a few short breaths, and closed his eyes forever. Cachito, Cachito, my little warrior was now in his own Valhalla. He was a valiant doggy, and he received a funeral fit for a Viking. But now I hear no more jingling of his tags as he trotted behind me, no little snores at night, just silence and emptiness in a house formerly so full of the presence of one little dog. The mail lies inert where dropped, the squirrels run around unchallenged, and the large oak tree no longer harbors the shadow of one very small dog. Small creatures, yet so much love, so much personality, and such large hearts. Do dogs have a soul? I am told not. And yet, how can they not? When they feel our moods, understand our thoughts, when they become part of our soul. Perhaps someday, when man reaches a higher evolutionary plane, we will understand this bond between human and animal and discover that of the two, the nobler by far is the animal species. Good night, Cachito, my little warrior. Now, that sounds very weepy. I think I may have to redo that.